Hello, my name is Nathan House and welcome. We are going to be studying Hebrews chapter 7 in just a moment. Let me just encourage you before we start that if you can subscribe or like this video, that would be helpful to me. And again, I am with the Houston Church of Christ in Houston, California. And real quickly, as we get into Hebrews chapter 7 in just a moment, I'm going to kind of show you just a couple of things we've already talked about and just remind you because we're going to see some of these things in our study today. So again, one of the major points in the book of Hebrews is the superiority of Jesus Christ, his supremacy over angels, Moses. But today we're going to notice over Abraham. And so we're going to be in chapter 7. We're going to look at the first 10 verses. We'll finish the chapter next time. But this one is going to have a lot of Old Testament things in it that you guys might want to be just aware of, made aware of. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So again, we're going to be looking at this specific point here, the supremacy of Jesus over Abraham. But we're going to notice how he does that. And one more time, I want to show you one other thing the book of Hebrews does is it looks at an Old Testament passage and it unpacks it. It looks at it in detail. And so right now we are still looking at Psalm chapter 110, verse 4. And you can see here as I've tried to put the corresponding passage from the book of Hebrews. We're in chapter 7. It falls within this whole discussion of Psalm chapter 110, verse 4. And let's look at that real quickly, just as a reminder. So here is Psalm chapter 110, verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. We've already looked at this a little bit. In fact, we've looked at it quite a bit. But real quickly, just to notice again, this very important point. It is talking about the priesthood that Jesus Christ would have that would resemble the priesthood of Melchizedek. So we're going to spend some time looking at who Melchizedek was and discussing that a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into Hebrews chapter 7, the first 10 verses. So again, you could follow along on the screen, or you can open up your own Bible and follow along that way. So let's read these verses, and then we'll look at some other slides, and then we'll come back to this again. Notice verse 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him, to Melchizedek, Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. He is first, talking about Melchizedek, by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Salem, that is, king of peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. So notice again this word, forever. Notice these two words, priest forever, right? In Psalm chapter 110, verse 4, what did we see? We saw this just a moment ago. Let's go back there real quick. Again, notice this. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So again, the Hebrew writer says he resembles the Melchizedek in Christ, noticing these comparisons. He resembles the Son of God. He continues a priest forever. Verse 4. See how great this man was, talking about Melchizedek. Look at how great Melchizedek was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch. So again, in the mind of a Jew, there were very few people that were as great as Abraham. You know, Abraham and Moses and King David were some of these men that the Jewish nation held in such high regards. So here is this patriarch, Abraham, and Abraham, it says, gave a tenth of his spoils to Melchizedek. Verse 5. And those descendants of Levi, we'll talk about this more in a moment, but those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these are also descended from Abraham. But this man, Melchizedek, who does not have his descent from them, meaning Melchizedek, he doesn't find his origins in Abraham or from Abraham. Or he was living at the same time as Abraham, and he certainly then was not a descendant of Abraham. But this man Melchizedek, who does not descend from Abraham, but from them, from Abraham and from Abraham's descendants, from them he received tithes from Abraham, and he blessed Abraham, who had the promises. God gave promises to Abraham, all these great promises we've studied in the past. And yet Melchizedek blesses Abraham. Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek. Verse 7, notice the Hebrew writer's conclusion. And we'll talk about these more in a moment. It is beyond dispute that the inferior, which is Abraham in this case, is blessed by the superior Melchizedek. So Melchizedek in this text is called the superior one. And the Hebrew writer demonstrates his superiority two ways. First of all, Melchizedek blesses Abraham, showing his superiority. Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek, showing his inferiority. So it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. So again, notice this phrase: who is it that lives forever? It's Jesus Christ. It's the high priest, Jesus Christ. It is the high priest that is under consideration right now, who resembles Melchizedek, being a priest forever. So again, he's the one who lives. Verse 9, one might even say that Levi himself, who paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So if you're not familiar with this Old Testament passage and this Old Testament study of genealogy, it might seem a little weird and confusing. Let's talk about it for a few minutes, and then we will get back to the Hebrew text one more time, and hopefully that makes a little more sense the second time through. So here is the passage where Melchizedek is mentioned in the Old Testament. So obviously we see him alluded to in Psalm chapter 110, verse 4. But this is the story of Melchizedek. This is where his story is told, and there's not much to it. But notice how important it is in the writer of the book of Hebrews. I'm going to move my picture down a little bit here. You'll still see the top of my head, which I'm sure is a great blessing for you. Just joking. All right, Genesis chapter 14. Look at verse 17 and following. After his return, this is talking about Abraham. So Abraham had gone out. He had defeated these kings, defeated 5 kings. So he's returning from this defeat of these kings, of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. Then the king of Sodom, in the same city of Sodom and Gomorrah, we know those cities are wicked cities, but that story is not unpacked yet. But the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah. That is the valley, the king's valley. So here's what I want you to see so far. Abraham has defeated 5 kings. He's coming back, and he's met by actually a couple of kings. First of all, he's met by the king of Sodom, which is not important for this point right here. But who else meets him? Melchizedek. Melchizedek comes out, and he also meets Abraham after this battle. Melchizedek, king of Salem. He brings out bread and wine to feed Abraham. And notice this. Notice what the book of Genesis says concerning Melchizedek. He was priest of God Most High. It's really interesting just to pause and consider this for a second. I'm going to put my slide myself back up here, hopefully out of the way a bit. So he's priest of God Most High. What's interesting about this really is that there was no priesthood, right? There was no Levitical priesthood. The Levitical priesthood they were descendants of Abraham. Abraham is still alive, so there was no priesthood. There was no Mosaic law. There was no Levitical law. There was none of these things. And yet here was this man, Melchizedek, who the book of Genesis, Moses writes the book of Genesis. This book tells us that this Melchizedek was priest of God Most High. How interesting is this? This man, Melchizedek, was priest of God Most High before there was ever a priesthood, or at least before there was ever a Levitical priesthood. This is an important point. We'll talk more about it in a minute. So again, notice verse 18 and following. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine to Abraham and his men. He was priest of God Most High, verse 19, and he, Melchizedek, blessed him. Melchizedek blesses Abraham. And again, what did the Hebrew writer say? The book of Hebrews says, and it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. So Melchizedek, the superior, blesses the inferior Abraham. And he says to Abraham, blessed be Abram, his name was not yet changed to Abraham, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. So it's interesting to stop and notice this phrase, God Most High, occurs 3 times right here in Genesis 14. He's priest of God Most High. He calls on Abraham to be blessed by God Most High. And then he recognizes the greatness of God. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And then notice this concluding remark. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. So Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth. He tithed. This is where we get that word tithe, right? He gave him a tithe. He gave him a tenth of everything that he had won. So the Hebrew writer will talk about this particular story in the book of Hebrews chapter 7. Let's talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to move my slide out of the way if I can figure out a good place to hide myself here. So notice this again. Just real quickly looking at the lineage of Abraham, because the Hebrew writer will reference this. And so let's just talk about Abraham and let's talk about his descendants just for a moment. And so some of this I'm sure is review for you. But again, Abraham had his son Isaac, right? He was married to Sarah. They had their son Isaac when they were old people, elderly people, right? She was barren, but God blessed her, opened her womb. She had a son, Isaac. Isaac was then be married to Rebekah, and Isaac would have two sons, right? Jacob and Esau. But God was blessing the family of Jacob. So here's Abraham who had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob's name would be changed to Israel, from which we get the Israelites. So then Jacob would have 12 sons. He had 2 wives, 2 concubines, so 4 wives in total. And so he had 12 sons from those 4 women. 12 sons, and we know the names of those sons, and we're not studying them right now, but Reuben, Simeon, Levi. So here was the third oldest son. I put Judah on here also because Levi and Judah are obviously very significant tribes. From the tribe of Levi, this would be the priestly tribe. This would be where Moses would come from, and Aaron, the very first high priest. So this tribe, the tribe of Levi, is a significant tribe because it's the priestly tribe. And so the other 11 tribes, Reuben's tribe, Simeon, all these other tribes would pay tithes to the tribe of Levi because their work was the work of the temple, the work of the tabernacle. And so they would pay 10% of their belongings, of their goods, to the tribe of Levi. But again, notice this, Levi is a descendant of Abraham. Abraham paid tithes to this other priest named Melchizedek. Melchizedek was not from the tribe of Levi, because he preceded the tribe of Levi. But Moses and Aaron, again, let's go back to this. Moses and Aaron were Levites, from the tribe of Levi. Aaron, again, would be the first high priest. And so the other 11 tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, all those other tribes, Joseph and Benjamin, we're all familiar with Joseph because he was the beloved son who had the coat of many colors. So that's why I put his name on here as well. But these tribes all came from Abraham. These 12 tribes all came from this family of Abraham. They all paid tithes. The other 11 sons all paid tithes to the one priestly tribe. Real quickly, look at this concerning Melchizedek just for a moment. So the Hebrew writer talked about his name and its meaning. So let's look at this for a second. Melchizedek, the Hebrew word melech means king. Sedek means right or righteous. So his name, Melchizedek, king of righteousness. So he was Melchizedek, king of righteousness. The Hebrew writer said, but he's also king of Salem, which the book of Genesis pointed out. Let's go back here real quick. He was king of Salem. And so he was king of Salem, which means king of peace. So his name means king of righteousness. He was also the king of the city of Salem, or Jerusalem. So he was the king of peace. And just real quickly, I just thought we'd look at the tribes of Levi a little bit more and the significance of those. So this is the arrangement when they left Egypt and they were coming out into the wilderness. The tabernacle was being built. There was a certain arrangement that the tribes were supposed to have around the tabernacle. And so you have these 3 are different descendants of Levi. So they're the closest ones to the tabernacle. Moses and Aaron were here. And again, Moses and Aaron were from the Kohathite tribe, from the Kohathite clan. But all of these clans were Levite clans. So the priests had to come from not only the Levite clans, but from the Kohathites. And then the other tribes were all then surrounding the Levites. And you can again notice here's Reuben, Judah over here, Dan, Ephraim, and the other tribes are all scattered around this as well. And then later on, when they came into the promised land, God once again divided the land by tribes. You'll see Judah, Simeon, Reuben, all of these different tribes, but you'll not notice any allotment of land for the tribe of Levi, because the Levites were scattered throughout. There was Levitical cities, But the work of the Levites was primarily focused in the city of Jerusalem and around the temple. So let's go ahead and go back to the book of Hebrews for a moment. So let's read this now with a little bit of background. So Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, he meets Abraham. Abraham gives him a tenth of everything. So then talking about Melchizedek, he is first by translation of his name, king of righteousness, which we saw. Then he is also king of Salem, that means king of peace. And he appears on the scene in the book of Genesis. There's no description of his family. There's no genealogy. He certainly, as we've already mentioned, did not come from Abraham, being a contemporary. So there's no genealogy. He didn't come from the tribe of Levi through the Kohathites. There was no genealogy to trace. There was no description of how of his parents, or anything. So in this kind of this mysterious, this little mystery here, right? There's no beginning that they could point to. There was no genealogy they could point to. So in a way, he resembles the Son of God, because his priesthood did not have any beginning that we could point to, no end that we could point to. He didn't come from the tribe of Levi. And again, how interesting is this? Jesus Christ did not come from the tribe of Levi. He came from a different tribe. He came from the tribe of Judah. So now again, he's going to show how Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. This great man is the inferior, right? He is the one, this great man blesses Abraham. This great man received tithes from Abraham. And verse 7 said, it is beyond dispute that the inferior, Abraham, is blessed by the superior, Melchizedek. Verse 8, in the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. So again, while the Levites were receiving tithes in the Old Testament, they were ultimately giving to God, who is the living God. And so I think that there's an interesting little comparison here. Jesus Christ is the one the Hebrew writer is highlighting as the living one. He is the one who continues a priest forever. So he is the one who lives. And so again, Jesus is, in a sense, receiving tithes. Melchizedek was receiving tithes. So again, all of these things are showing the superiority of Jesus Christ, the superiority of Melchizedek. And Jesus, again, Psalm 110, verse 4, he is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Verse 9, one might even say that Levi himself, because again, Levi came from Abraham. So there is this sense in which Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek, right? One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, normally he receives tithes, but this time he paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor Abraham when Melchizedek met him. So this is kind of all a lot of preliminary stuff, just looking at Melchizedek and that descendant of tribes from the tribe of Levi. We're noticing some similarities and comparisons between Jesus Christ and his priesthood with that of the priesthood of Aaron and of the tribe of Levi. And Jesus Christ's priesthood does not resemble that of Aaron. His priesthood does not resemble that of the tribes of Levi. His is different. His is a priesthood forever, without a genealogy like the Aaronic priesthood had to have. His priesthood was different. And again, the Hebrew writer is going to continue to show how his priesthood is different, but not just different, superior to that of Aaron. And so next time, we're going to go ahead and finish this chapter. So go ahead and read chapter 7, and you guys have a blessed day.